It was a small, cracked shaving mirror, no bigger than the palm of my hand. I still have it in a drawer upstairs, tucked away in a cigar box and wrapped in a piece of moth-eaten wool. Most people look at a mirror and see themselves, but when I look into that jagged glass, I see a man I never knew and a choice I can never take back. It's been 80 years, and I still can't look at my own reflection without wondering if the man who owned that mirror had a mother waiting for him back in Bavaria or a girl he intended to marry. We were told the enemy was a monster, a faceless machine of war. But the glass doesn't lie. It shows you the truth, even when the truth is something you'd rather bury in the mud of a French forest. The winter of 1944 was a different kind of cold. It wasn't just the temperature, it was a cold that got into your bones and stayed there, making your joints ache and your mind go numb. I was 20 years old, a corporal in the infantry, but they'd stuck a scoped Springfield in my hands because I grew up hunting deer in the woods of Pennsylvania. I knew how to sit still. I knew how to wait. In the woods, you learn that the loudest thing is silence, and when that silence breaks, someone usually dies. But the war wasn't like the woods back home. In Pennsylvania, the deer didn't have rifles, and they didn't have signals. They didn't have unwritten rules about who lived and who died. We were stationed near a ridge overlooking a small, ruined village. It didn't even have a name on our maps, just a collection of stone houses with the roofs blown out. My spotter was a kid named Miller, barely 19, with ears that stuck out and a nervous habit of whistling through his teeth. We'd been in that foxhole for 3 days, shivering under a tarp, watching the German lines across the valley. You get to know the enemy when you watch them through a 2x5x power scope. You see them eat, you see them smoke, you see them try to stay warm just like you. You start to realize they aren't machines. They're just boys who were told to go to a place they didn't know and fight people they didn't hate. One afternoon, the sun hit the valley at just the right angle. It was a rare moment of light in a month of gray. Miller was scanning the tree line when he nudged me. He didn't say a word, just pointed. I brought my rifle up, the wood cold against my cheek, and peered through the glass. There, tucked between 2 shattered oaks, was a glint, a rhythmic, steady pulsing of light. 2 short flashes, 1 long. It wasn't a signal for an attack. It wasn't Morse code for a troop movement. It was something else. I watched for a long time, my finger resting lightly on the trigger guard. Across the way, a German sniper was using a mirror to reflect the sun toward us. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I remember turning to Miller, my breath puffing out in white clouds. I asked him if he saw it. He nodded, his face pale. He'd heard the rumors, just like I had. The old-timers, the guys who had been fighting since Africa, they talked about the gentleman's truce. It wasn't something the officers knew about, and it sure as hell wasn't in the manual. It was a secret language between the men who lived in the shadows. A double flash meant I see you. A third longer flash meant I'm not going to shoot if you don't. It was a way of saying that for today, for this 1 hour of sunlight, we could both just exist without the fear of a bullet finding our skull. Sergeant Higgins had told me about it once when we were sharing a bottle of sour wine in a cellar in Nancy. He said that when you spend enough time looking through a scope, you start to feel a strange connection to the man on the other side. You're both elite, you're both hated by the regular infantry, and you're both incredibly lonely. He told me that sometimes, when the weather was too bad or the war felt too long, snipers would acknowledge each other. They'd signal a truce. It was a mercy that allowed you to stand up and stretch your cramped legs or eat a tin of meat without looking over your shoulder. But Higgins warned me. He said, "Henry, that signal is a bond. If you ever break it, the war will take something from you that you can't get back. It's the only piece of your soul you have left out here." I looked back through the scope. The German was there. I could see the edge of his camo smock. He was sitting up, leaning against a tree, his own rifle resting across his knees. He wasn't even looking at me anymore. He'd given the signal, he'd seen my lens reflect the sun, and he'd trusted that I was a man of my word. He was eating something, moving his jaw slowly. He looked so peaceful. For a moment, the war felt like it was miles away. The sound of distant artillery was just background noise, like thunder before a summer rain. I felt a surge of something. Maybe it was respect, maybe it was just relief. I lowered my rifle. I told Miller to take a break, to get some sleep. But as the sun began to dip behind the ridge, the shadows grew long, and the cold returned with a vengeance. The peace of the afternoon started to curdle in my stomach. I started thinking about the boys we'd lost at the hedgerows. I thought about Bobby Thompson, who'd been shot by a sniper while he was trying to fix a radio wire. I thought about the letters I'd had to help write to mothers back home. The anger, that slow-burning fuse that stays lit in every soldier, started to spark. I looked at the German again. He was still there, but now he was packing up his gear. He was moving slowly, confident in the truce we'd made with a couple of flashes of light. I felt the weight of the Springfield. It felt heavier than usual. My mind started playing tricks on me. I told myself that he was the enemy. I told myself that if I didn't kill him today, he'd kill one of my friends tomorrow. I told myself that the secret signal was just a trick, a way for him to get home safe while we suffered in the mud. I didn't talk to Miller about it. I didn't ask for advice. I just slid the safety off. The click sounded like a canyon collapsing in the quiet of the foxhole. I lined up the crosshairs on the center of his chest. He was reaching for his rucksack, his back partially turned to me. He was vulnerable. He was human. And I pulled the trigger. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. The recoil kicked into my shoulder, a familiar jarring bite. Through the scope, I saw the man jerk. He didn't fall immediately. He slumped against the tree, his hands clawing at the bark for a second before he slid down into the snow. The silence that followed was deafening. It was a different kind of silence than before. It was heavy, like a shroud. Miller woke up with a start, asking what happened, if we were under attack. I couldn't find my voice. I just stared at that spot between the two oaks. The glint was gone. The man was gone. I had broken the rule. I had spat on the only bit of humanity left in that godforsaken valley. We moved out 2 days later. The brass decided to push through the village, and my unit was tasked with clearing the tree line where the sniper had been. I didn't want to go. I felt a sickness in my gut that no amount of ginger or nerves could settle. When we reached the two oaks, the snow was stained a deep, rusty brown. He was still there. The medics hadn't gotten to him, or maybe they just didn't care about a lone sniper in the woods. He looked smaller in person. He wasn't a monster. He was just a boy, maybe 19, with blonde hair that was matted with blood and frost. I knelt down beside him. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it might break. I didn't know what I was looking for. Maybe a reason, maybe an excuse. I reached into his pocket and pulled out that small, cracked shaving mirror. It was tucked into a little leather pouch. There was a photo stuck to the back of it, held on with a piece of tape. It was a picture of a woman sitting on a bench, holding a small child. They were smiling. The sun was shining in the photo, just like it had been the day I killed him. I realized then that when he was flashing that signal to me, he wasn't just asking for his own life. He was asking for theirs. He was trying to make sure that little boy had a father to come home to. I took the mirror. I don't know why. Maybe I thought I needed to carry the weight of what I'd done. I walked away from those trees, but I left a part of myself there in the snow. The rest of the war is a blur of noise and smoke, but that moment is crystal clear. I've lived a long life, Henry Lawson has. I came home, I got a job at the mill, I married a wonderful woman named Martha, and we raised 3 children of our own. I've been a good neighbor, a good father, a good man by most standards. But every time I look in a mirror, I see that boy's face. I see the flash of light in the trees. I see the moment I decided that the war was more important than the truth. People ask me about the war sometimes. They want to hear about the glory, the medals, the big battles. They want to hear about how we saved the world. And we did, I suppose. We did what had to be done. But they never ask about the things we lost that didn't involve blood. They don't ask about the signals or the truces or the moments where we realized the man in the other uniform was just like us. I'm 92 years old now, and I'm the only one left who remembers that day in the valley. Miller passed away 10 years ago. Higgins is gone. Even the village is rebuilt now, full of people who don't know that the soil beneath their feet is soaked in the choices of young men who were too tired to be brave. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I remember the way the air felt right after the shot. It was like the world held its breath. You don't realize until you do something like that how much you rely on those small, unspoken agreements to keep your sanity. War is chaos, but we try to build little fences around the madness so we don't fall in. That secret signal, those flashes of light, they were a fence. They were a way of saying that even in hell, we could still recognize another soul. When I broke that rule, I tore down the fence. For the rest of the war, I never felt safe again. I didn't just fear the Germans. I feared the darkness inside myself. I feared that I had become the very thing I was sent there to stop. After I found that mirror, I couldn't use my scope the same way. Every time I looked through the glass, I wasn't looking for targets anymore. I was looking for faces. I was looking for signals. I spent the rest of the winter intentionally missing shots. I'd aim a few inches to the left or a foot too high. My commanding officer thought I'd lost my touch, that the combat fatigue was setting in. He moved me back to regular infantry duties, and I was grateful for it. I'd rather carry a heavy bar and kick down doors than sit in the silence with my thoughts and a rifle that knew too much. There was a night in early March, just before we crossed the Rhine. We were hunkered down in a cellar, and the shelling was so bad the dust was falling from the ceiling like flour. A young private, a replacement who'd only been with us for a week, was crying in the corner. He was shaking, clutching his rifle like a crucifix. I went over to him and sat down. I didn't tell him it was going to be okay because I didn't know if it was. I just pulled out that cracked mirror and showed it to him. I told him, this belonged to a man who wanted to go home, just like you, just like me. I didn't tell him I killed the man. I just let him hold the mirror. He calmed down after a while, looking at his own tired eyes in the glass. It gave him something to hold on to that wasn't a weapon. That's the thing about memories. They aren't just pictures in your head. They have weight. They have a scent. When I think about France, I don't think about the Eiffel Tower or the wine. I think about the smell of wet wool and the metallic tang of blood in the snow. I think about the sound of that mirror clicking against the stones as I walked away. I often wonder if that little boy in the photograph is still alive. He'd be an old man now, maybe 70 or 80. Does he have his father's eyes? Does he know that his father tried to send a signal of peace in the middle of a war? Does he hate the Americans? Or does he just wonder why his father never came home from a nameless village in the woods? I've never told my children the full story. I told them I was a soldier, and I told them I saw things I'd rather forget. They see the medals in the shadow box and they think I'm a hero. But a hero doesn't break a truce. A hero doesn't shoot a man who's eating his lunch and trusting in the goodness of a stranger. I'm just a man who survived, and sometimes survival is a heavier burden than dying. I'm telling this now because I'm 92, and the doctors say my heart is getting tired. I don't want to take this secret to the grave. I want people to know that even in the middle of the greatest war in history, there were moments of grace. And I want them to know what happens when you turn your back on that grace. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. The secret signal wasn't just for snipers, you know. It was a symbol for all of us. It was the cigarette shared between trenches. It was the pause in firing to let the medics gather the wounded. It was the realization that the Huns or the Krauts were just Hans and Fritz from down the street. We spend so much time teaching young men how to hate, but we don't have to teach them how to recognize a brother. That comes naturally. You have to work hard to ignore it. I worked hard that day. I pushed down every decent instinct I had because I thought that's what a soldier was supposed to do. I thought being tough meant being heartless. I remember the day I got home. My mother was waiting at the station in Philadelphia. She hugged me so hard I thought my ribs would crack. She cried and said she was so glad her good boy was back. I stood there, feeling the weight of the mirror in my pocket, and I felt like a liar. I wasn't her good boy anymore. I was a man who had broken a sacred bond. I spent years trying to earn my way back to being that good boy. I worked double shifts. I volunteered at the church. I helped every person who ever asked for it. I tried to balance the scales, but the scales of war don't work like that. One life taken in cold blood weighs more than 1,000 acts of kindness. Martha, my wife, she found the mirror once. It was a few years after we were married. She was cleaning out my old footlocker and she held it up, looking at the crack in the glass. She asked me where I got it. I told her I found it in the mud in Germany. She looked at the photo on the back and her eyes softened. She said, "I hope they made it." I couldn't look her in the eye. I just said, "Me too, Martha, me too." That was the closest I ever came to confessing. I think she knew I was carrying something heavy, but she was a woman of that generation. She knew that some things are better left unsaid if you want to keep moving forward. I wonder if that German sniper saw me before I fired. I wonder if, in that split second when the bullet was traveling through the air, he saw the glint of my scope and thought, He's breaking the signal. That's the thought that keeps me up at night. The betrayal. To die in battle is one thing. To die because you trusted someone you shouldn't have, that's a different kind of death. It's a death that happens in the heart before it happens in the body. I've spent 80 years trying to apologize to a ghost. I've sat in the dark and whispered, "I'm sorry" to the empty air more times than I can count. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. War changes the way you see the world. Before the war, I thought things were black and white. There were the good guys and the bad guys. There was right and there was wrong. But the longer you stay in the foxhole, the more the colors start to bleed together. You realize that the right thing is often just the thing that keeps you alive, and the wrong thing is often the thing that makes you feel human. I chose to stay alive that day. I chose to be a good soldier. But in doing so, I lost the part of Henry Lawson that could look at the world with clear eyes. I became a man of shadows, a man who knew the price of a broken promise. I've seen the world change so much since 1945. I've seen men walk on the moon. I've seen the rise of the internet. I've seen wars come and go in places I can't even pronounce. But human nature doesn't change. We're still just boys in the woods, looking for signals, trying to decide if the person on the other side is a friend or a foe. My advice to anyone listening, anyone who might find themselves in a position of power or a position of conflict, is this: don't break the signal. When you find a moment of peace, even if it's small, even if it's unofficial, hold on to it with everything you've got, because once you let it go, you can't ever get it back. I remember a dream I had a few years ago. I was back in that valley, but the snow was gone. The trees were green and the sun was warm. I saw the German sniper sitting between the oaks. He wasn't bleeding. He was just sitting there, looking at the photo of his wife and son. I walked up to him, and he looked up at me. He didn't have a rifle. He just smiled and handed me a piece of bread. He didn't say anything, but he didn't have to. We just sat there together in the sun, two men who had finished their war. When I woke up, I felt a peace I hadn't felt in decades. Maybe it was just my mind trying to heal itself, or maybe, just maybe, it was a signal from the other side. I'm 92 now and I'm ready to go. I'm not afraid of what comes next. I hope that when I get to wherever we're going, that man is waiting for me. I hope he's got that mirror in his hand, and I hope he's ready to forgive me. I'd like to sit down with him and tell him about my kids. I'd like to hear about his son. I'd like to tell him that his mirror helped a young American private get through a long night in a cellar. I'd like to tell him that even though I broke the rule, his life had meaning. It had more meaning than he could have ever imagined. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I remember the exact moment I stopped being a hunter and started being a soldier. It was a month before Normandy, during training in England. We were told that we weren't shooting targets, we were shooting the ideology of evil. They wanted us to forget that there was a person behind the uniform. And for a while, it worked. You get caught up in the rhythm of the march, the bark of the sergeant, the necessity of the mission, but that training fails the moment you see a man's face through a high-powered lens. The lens doesn't just magnify the image, it magnifies the humanity. It brings you closer than you ever wanted to be to the person you're about to destroy. That German sniper, he had a way of moving that reminded me of my brother, Arthur. The way he adjusted his cap, the way he rolled his shoulders when they got stiff. He was a person before he was a target, and that's the secret the military doesn't want you to know. They want you to stay at a distance. They want you to believe in the faceless enemy. But there are no faceless enemies in a sniper's nest. There is only you, the wind, and the man you've chosen to kill. Breaking that signal wasn't just a military mistake. It was a betrayal of the only thing that separates us from the animals. Animals kill for food or defense. Only men kill because they've convinced themselves that a promise made in the light doesn't count in the dark. The guilt is a funny thing. It doesn't stay the same. In my 30s, it was a sharp, biting thing that made me angry. In my 50s, it was a dull ache, like an old injury that acts up when it rains. Now in my 90s, it's just a companion. It sits in the chair next to me while I watch the birds at the feeder. It's part of who I am. I've come to realize that I don't want to forget. If I forgot, then the man I killed would truly be gone. By carrying the guilt, I keep his memory alive. I keep that moment in the valley from being just another forgotten casualty of a long war. I'm the keeper of his last few hours on Earth. I remember the first time I saw a mirror signal after the war. It was my grandson, playing in the backyard with a toy truck. He had a little piece of glass, and he was reflecting the sun onto the side of the house, laughing. My heart stopped. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. I had to go inside and sit down. He didn't know why Grandpa was so upset. He was just playing with the light. But for me, light will always be a language. It will always be a question. Do you see me? Are we at peace? Every time the sun reflects off a car window or a lake, I'm back in 1944. I'm looking through that Springfield, waiting for a flash. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. The morning after I took that shot, the fog stayed low in the valley, thick and white like a wool blanket. It muffled everything. The sound of the trucks, the clinking of our gear, even the voices of the men. It felt like the world was trying to hide what I'd done, or maybe it was just closing in on me. Miller didn't ask questions, but I saw him looking at me when he thought I wasn't watching. He'd been there, he'd seen the flashes, and he knew I'd waited until the truce was signaled before I squeezed that trigger. He was a kid, and kids look up to their corporals like they're some kind of moral compass. I could feel his gaze burning into the side of my head, and for the first time in the war, I felt ashamed to lead. We started moving toward the next ridge, pushing through the brush. Every snap of a twig sounded like a gunshot to me. I was jumpy, my eyes darting toward every shadow. That's the thing about breaking a rule like that. You stop trusting the world because you stopped being trustworthy yourself. I kept thinking that there was another sniper out there, someone who had seen me, someone who was waiting to balance the ledger. I realized then that the secret signal wasn't just a way to avoid getting shot. It was a way to keep your mind from fracturing. When you knew there was an understanding, you could sleep for an hour. You could let your guard down just enough to breathe. Without it, the woods weren't just dangerous, they were malicious. We reached a small farmhouse by noon. It was mostly rubble, one wall standing like a jagged tooth against the gray sky. There was a dead cow in the yard, and the smell was something I'll never quite get out of my nose. We were supposed to hold that position until the armor caught up. I sat in the dirt, leaning against a pile of broken stones, and pulled out that shaving mirror again. I looked at the photo of the woman and the child. The tape was starting to peel at the edges. I wondered if she was at home right then, maybe hanging laundry or making soup, thinking her husband was safe because he was a sniper and he knew how to hide. She didn't know that the rules had changed. She didn't know that a boy from Pennsylvania had decided those rules didn't apply anymore. Higgins came over and sat next to me. He was a rough man, had a scar that ran from his ear to his chin from a piece of shrapnel in North Africa. He saw the mirror in my hand. He didn't say anything for a long time, just lit a cigarette and let the smoke drift out of his nose. Finally, he asked, "You get him?" I nodded. I couldn't look at him. He took a long drag and said, "I saw the flashes yesterday, Henry, from the ridge. I saw him signal you." He paused, and the silence between us was heavier than the stones behind us. "You shouldn't have done it, son. Not because he was a good guy, but because now you're going to be looking for a signal in every shadow for the rest of your life, and you'll never believe it again." If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. Higgins was right. That's the part that sticks with me at 92. The war ended for the world in 1945, but for me, that specific kind of peace never returned. You see, when you're a sniper, you live in a world of observation. You see the intimate details of life. You see a man scratch his nose, or read a letter, or share a laugh with a buddy. You see them as humans before you turn them into statistics. The signal was a bridge between those two things. It was a way to acknowledge the human while acknowledging the war. By burning that bridge, I stepped into a place where everything was just a target. And when everything is a target, you eventually realize that you're one too. A few days later, we were moving through a dense patch of forest near the German border. The trees were tall and dark, the kind of place where the sun never quite touches the ground. We were on high alert because the werewolves, those last-ditch German resistance groups, were active in the area. I was leading a small scout team, Miller right behind me. We came across a clearing and I saw a movement in the brush. Instinct took over. I didn't wait. I didn't look for a signal. I didn't even think. I just brought the Springfield up and fired. The scream that followed wasn't the sound of a soldier. It was high-pitched, thin, and full of a terror that only a child can make. My heart dropped into my stomach. I ran forward, my boots sliding on the wet pine needles, praying to a God I hadn't spoken to in months that I was wrong, but I wasn't. It was a boy, maybe 12 years old, wearing an oversized Hitler Youth jacket that swallowed his small frame. He'd been holding a wooden stick, probably pretending it was a rifle. The bullet had hit him in the shoulder. He wasn't dead, but he was bleeding fast, his eyes wide and glassy with shock. I dropped my rifle and fell to my knees beside him. Miller was there a second later, his face white as a sheet. I started screaming for a medic, my voice cracking and echoing through the trees. I took off my jacket and pressed it against the wound, trying to stop the red from soaking into the dirt. The boy was looking at me, and in his eyes, I saw the same thing I'd seen in that shaving mirror. I saw a life that didn't understand why this was happening. He wasn't a soldier. He was a casualty of a world that had gone mad, and I was the one who had pulled the trigger because I was too afraid to look for a signal. That was the moment I truly understood why. The signal wasn't for the enemy. It was for us. It was a check on our own descent into savagery. It was a reminder to slow down, to look, to breathe, and to remember that not everything that moves is a threat to your soul. If I hadn't broken the rule with the sniper, I would have waited that extra second in the forest. I would have seen the wooden stick. I would have seen the smallness of the boy, but I had trained myself to ignore the humanity, to strike first and ask questions never. I had become a machine, and machines don't know the difference between a threat and a child. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. The medic arrived and managed to patch the boy up. They took him back to a field hospital, and I never saw him again. I don't even know if he survived the infection or the journey, but I carry his scream with me just as clearly as I carry the silence of the sniper. Those two moments are linked in my mind like two links in a chain. One led directly to the other. I had unlearned mercy, and the cost was paid by a child who just happened to be in the wrong woods at the wrong time. I sat in the dirt long after they carried him away, looking at my hands. They were covered in his blood, and no matter how much water I used later, I could still feel it. The older I get, the more I realize that the rules of war aren't about being polite. They're about survival, not of the body, but of the person you have to be when you go home. I came back to Pennsylvania, but I didn't come back whole. I brought back a ghost from a ridge in France and a scream from a forest in Germany. I brought back a cracked mirror that reminds me every morning that I am a man who broke his word. People talk about the greatest generation, and I suppose in many ways we were. We stood up when the world was burning, but being part of that generation meant carrying things that no one should have to carry. It meant living with the knowledge of what you're capable of when the lights go out. I remember my father talking about the Great War, the one before mine. He didn't say much, but he once told me that the hardest part wasn't the fighting, it was the after. He said you spend your whole youth learning how to be a killer, and then the rest of your life trying to remember how to be a neighbor. I didn't understand him then. I thought he was just being old and moody. But now, at 92, I understand perfectly. I've spent decades being a good neighbor, a good husband, a good father. I've mowed my lawn and paid my taxes and shaken hands at the grocery store. But in the back of my mind, I'm always that corporal in the foxhole, looking through a scope, waiting to betray a man who just wanted to see his wife again. I think about the concept of neutrality. We were told we were fighting for a neutral, free world. But there is no neutrality in the heart of a soldier. You are either moving toward the light or you are moving toward the dark. The signal was a small piece of light. It was a tiny, fragile bit of neutral ground where two enemies could agree that the world hadn't completely ended. When I fired that shot, I declared that there was no neutral ground. I declared that everything was a battlefield. And once you make that declaration, you can never really leave the war behind. It follows you into your kitchen, into your bedroom, into the quiet moments when you're holding your own child's hand. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I wonder sometimes what would have happened if I'd signaled back, if I'd flashed my own mirror and then sat there, eating my rations, watching the sun go down. Maybe that German sniper would have made it home. Maybe he would be sitting on a porch somewhere in Munich right now, telling his own grandson about the American who showed him mercy. Maybe our two stories would have met in the middle, a shared moment of peace in a sea of violence. I like to imagine that. It's a better story than the one I actually lived. It's a story where the world didn't lose its way, even for an hour. But that's the thing about life. You don't get to rewrite the parts you don't like. You just have to find a way to carry them. I started going to the VA meetings in the 70s after the boys started coming back from Vietnam. I saw the same look in their eyes that I saw in my own mirror, that haunted, distant stare. I realized then that it doesn't matter which war it is or what the uniform looks like. The betrayal of humanity is always the same. We all have our signals that we break. We all have our moments where we choose the easy shot over the hard mercy. And we all have to find a way to live with the silence that follows. I remember a specific night toward the end of the war near the town of Ham. We were staying in an abandoned schoolhouse. The chalkboards were still covered in lessons, and there were small desks lined up in neat rows. I found a piece of chalk, and I started to write on the board. I didn't know German, so I just wrote in English. I am sorry. I don't know who I was apologizing to. The sniper, the boy in the woods, or maybe just the school itself for being turned into a barracks. I wrote it over and over again until my fingers were white with dust. It didn't change anything, but it felt like I was trying to put something back into the world that I'd taken out. Miller saw me doing it. He didn't say anything. He just picked up a piece of chalk and wrote "Me Too" underneath my words. We stood there for a long time, looking at that board. It was a strange kind of confession. We were two young men who had been told we were heroes, but we felt like thieves. We had stolen lives, and in doing so, we had lost a piece of ourselves that we couldn't describe. The war was almost over, but the after was just beginning. We could hear the artillery in the distance, but the loudest thing in that room was the sound of the chalk scratching against the slate. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. When the surrender finally came, there was no cheering in my unit. We were just tired. We sat in a field and watched the German soldiers being marched past us. They looked just like we did, dirty, exhausted, and hollowed out. I looked for that blonde hair, for a face that might belong to the man with the mirror, but I knew I wouldn't find it. He was buried under the snow in a forest that was already starting to forget we were ever there. I realized that the victory didn't feel like a win. It felt like an end, like a fire that had finally burned itself out because there was nothing left to consume. I came home on a troop ship, leaning over the rail and watching the waves. Most of the guys were talking about girls and beer and jobs. I just looked at the horizon. I had the mirror in my pocket, wrapped in that wool cloth. I thought about throwing it into the Atlantic. I thought about letting the ocean take the weight of it, but I couldn't do it. It felt like if I threw it away, I was betraying the man a second time. I had to keep it. I had to look into that cracked glass and remember what happens when you decide that the rules don't matter. I had to be the witness to my own failure. 80 years. It's a long time to live with a decision that took less than a second to make. I've seen my children grow up. I've seen my wife pass away. I've seen the world turn over and over. And through it all, that moment on the ridge has remained the center of my life. It's the lens through which I see everything. When I see people fighting on the news, I don't see the politics. I see the signals being ignored. I see the moments where someone could choose to flash a light, but chooses to fire a shot instead. I see the why that they don't understand yet, but they will. They will when they're 92 and sitting in a quiet house, wondering where all the time went. I hope that by telling this, I'm putting a little bit of that signal back into the world. I hope that someone listening might remember to look twice, might remember that the enemy is often just someone who is as tired and scared as they are, might remember that the rules we make in the shadows are sometimes the only things that keep us from the dark. I'm an old man now, and my voice isn't what it used to be, but my memory is clear. That flash of light on the ridge was a gift, and I threw it away. Don't make the same mistake. Don't think that winning the war is more important than keeping your soul. Because the war ends, but the soul has to live with what's left. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I remember the day we finally crossed into Germany. It felt different than France or Belgium. In those places, we were liberators. Even if the towns were reduced to ash, people would come out of the cellars with wine or flowers or just tears. But in Germany, the air felt thick with a different kind of silence. It was the silence of a house where a tragedy has happened and no one knows how to talk about it. We weren't the heroes there. We were the invaders. I looked at the houses as we rolled past in the trucks. Neat little curtains, flower boxes that had been neglected, laundry hanging on lines that looked like white flags. It made the killing harder. When you're fighting in a field, it's abstract. When you're fighting in someone's backyard, you see the tricycle in the grass, and you realize that every bullet you fire is tearing through a world someone spent a lifetime building. I still had the mirror tucked in my shirt pocket, right against my heart. I could feel the sharp edge of the leather pouch through the fabric of my olive drabs. It was like a second pulse. Every time we stopped to dig in for the night, I'd take it out just for a second. I didn't look at my own face. I looked at that woman and her child. The baby in the photo was wearing a knitted cap, and the woman had this look of quiet pride, the kind of look my mother had in the photos she sent me. I started to have this recurring thought that maybe I was supposed to find them. Maybe the war wasn't going to end for me until I could hand that mirror back to her and tell her, well, what would I tell her? I'm the man who broke the signal. I'm the man who made sure your husband never saw this child grow up. The fighting in the Rhineland was brutal. It was a slow, grinding crawl through mud and jagged steel. I remember one night near a town called Wessel. The artillery was so constant it felt like the earth was shivering. I was in a basement with 4 other guys, including Miller. He hadn't talked much since the day I shot the boy in the woods. He'd gone from a talkative kid who whistled through his teeth to a ghost who moved only when he was told. We were sitting there, sharing a cold tin of hash, and the candlelight was dancing on the damp walls. Miller looked at me and asked, "Do you think we're ever going to get clean, Henry?" I didn't have an answer for him. I knew what he meant. He didn't mean the mud on our boots. He meant the stuff that sticks to you when the lights go out. I just patted the pocket where the mirror was and told him to try and get some sleep. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. We moved into a town that had been flattened by the heavies, the B-17s. It was just a skeleton of a place. Smoldering wood, the smell of cordite and wet plaster. We were clearing the cellars, one by one. It was terrifying work. You never knew if you were going to find a grandmother clutching a crucifix or a squad of SS men with their fingers on the pins of their grenades. I was leading the way into a butcher shop that had lost its front windows. I went down the stairs, my bar held tight against my hip, my heart thumping like a drum. In the corner, huddled behind a meat locker, was an old man. He must have been 80. He was wearing a suit, a nice one, though it was covered in white dust. He held up a hand, not in a salute, but just a gesture for me to wait. He reached into his pocket slowly. My thumb was on the safety. I was ready to spray the room, but he didn't pull out a Luger. He pulled out a small piece of white cloth. He waved it gently, back and forth. It was the same rhythm as the mirror signal. 2 short, 1 long. My knees felt weak. I lowered my weapon. He didn't speak English, and I didn't speak German, but he looked at my uniform, and then he looked at the mirror pouch sticking out of my pocket. He pointed to it and said something in a low, gravelly voice. I pulled the mirror out and showed it to him. He looked at the photo on the back for a long time. Tears started to track through the dust on his cheeks. He nodded and patted his own chest. He wasn't the man from the ridge, but he knew the man's language. He knew the signal. He stayed with us for 2 days. We gave him some of our chocolate and some clean water. He didn't seem afraid of us anymore. He just sat in the corner of the butcher shop, watching us with these ancient, knowing eyes. He reminded me of my grandfather back in Pennsylvania. He had that same way of sitting perfectly still, like a tree. Before we moved out, I tried to give him the mirror. I thought maybe he could find the woman, but he pushed my hand back. He shook his head and whispered something that sounded like, "Your burden." I didn't need a translator to understand that. He was telling me that I couldn't just give away the guilt. I couldn't pass the mirror to someone else and expect to be free. I had to carry it to the end. The road to the Elbe was a blur of surrender. German soldiers were walking toward us by the thousands, their hands on their heads, their faces masks of defeat. They were done. They wanted it to be over just as much as we did. I watched them pass, looking for a blonde sniper with a missing mirror, but I knew better. I felt this strange sense of kinship with them. We were all just survivors of a hurricane that had lasted 5 years. When we finally met up with the Russians, there was a lot of drinking and dancing, but I stayed on the outskirts. I sat on the hood of a jeep and looked at the river. The water was dark and fast. I thought about the thousands of mirrors and photos and letters that were floating in rivers all across Europe, the debris of 1 billion broken signals. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. When the news of the surrender in the Pacific came, that was when it finally felt real. We were going home. I remember the ship ride back across the Atlantic. It was a massive transport, filled with thousands of men. The air was thick with the smell of sweat and tobacco and anticipation. But there was also a tension. We were all terrified of who we had become. We spent the nights leaning over the railing, looking at the black water, wondering if our mothers and our sweethearts would recognize the eyes looking back at them. I kept the mirror in my hand, feeling the cold glass. I wondered if I should drop it into the sea. It would have been so easy. A small splash, and the evidence of my betrayal would be gone forever. But I didn't. I realized that if I dropped that mirror, I'd be killing that German sniper all over again. I'd be erasing the only proof that he ever existed, that he ever had a family, that he ever tried to make peace in the middle of a war. I had to keep him alive in my pocket. I had to be the one to remember the flash of light. When we saw the Statue of Liberty through the morning mist, there was a roar from the men that I'll never forget. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated relief. But as I stood there, I felt a weight in my chest that didn't go away. I was home, but I was bringing the war with me. I was bringing a cracked mirror and a secret that I couldn't tell a soul. The first few years back were the hardest. I'd be sitting at the dinner table with my parents and my sister, and they'd be talking about the new refrigerator or the neighbor's new car, and I'd just be staring at the mashed potatoes. I'd see the white of the potatoes, and I'd think of the snow in the Ardennes. I'd hear the clink of a fork, and I'd think of a safety being clicked off. I tried to talk to my father about it once. He was a veteran of the First War, like I said. He was smoking his pipe on the porch, and I sat down and asked him if the dreams ever stopped. He looked out at the street for a long time before he spoke. "They don't stop, Henry," he said. "They just get quieter. You learn to live with them like you learn to live with a bad knee." I met Martha at a dance in 1948. She was wearing a blue dress, and she had the kindest smile I'd ever seen. She didn't ask me about the war. She just asked me to dance. We were married a year later. I wanted to tell her. I wanted to lay my head in her lap and tell her about the sniper and the signal and the boy in the woods. But I was afraid. I was afraid that if she knew what I had done, she wouldn't look at me with that same kindness anymore. I was afraid I'd see the mirror reflect a monster. So I stayed silent. I tucked the mirror into the back of my footlocker, underneath my old uniform, and I tried to build a life on top of it. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. We had 3 children, David, Sarah, and little Ben. I loved them with a ferocity that scared me sometimes. I think it was because I knew how fragile it all was. I knew how easily a life could be snuffed out by a moment of fear or a broken rule. I worked at the mill, 40 years of hard labor, and I never missed a day. I wanted to be the most dependable man in the world. I wanted to prove that I was someone who kept his word. It was a penance, I suppose. Every hour of overtime, every heavy crate I lifted was a way of saying I'm sorry to the ghost in the woods. I became the man that everyone in town looked up to, the steady Henry Lawson. But the mirror was always there. Once a year, on the anniversary of the day I took that shot, I'd go down to the basement alone. I'd pull out the footlocker and I'd hold that piece of glass. The photo was fading now, the colors turning into a sepia blur. The woman's smile was harder to see, but I could still feel it. I'd sit there in the dark, the smell of mothballs and damp concrete around me, and I'd signal into the darkness. 2 short, 1 long. I'd use a flashlight or just my imagination. I'd ask for forgiveness, and I'd wait for a signal that never came. I did this for 50 years. 50 years of secret signals in a Pennsylvania basement. Then, in the late 90s, everything changed. I saw a segment on the news about a group of veterans, American and German, who were meeting up at the old battlefields to plant trees and share stories. It hit me like a physical blow. I realized that the war wasn't a static thing. It was still moving, still changing. Those men were finding a way to make the signal real, decades after the guns had fallen silent. I told Martha I needed to go to Europe. She looked at me for a long time, her eyes searching mine, and then she just nodded. She didn't ask why, she just helped me pack my bag. I went back to that ridge. It took some doing to find it. The village had been rebuilt, and the trees had grown tall and thick, but the shape of the land was the same. I found the 2 oaks. They were massive now, their bark gnarled and scarred. I sat down between them, right where the German sniper had sat. I pulled out the mirror. The sun was hitting the valley at that same angle, that same golden hour light. I looked across to where my foxhole had been. It was just a grassy depression now, filled with wildflowers. I held the mirror up and I let the sun catch it. 2 short, 1 long. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I sat there for 3 hours. I signaled until my arm was sore. I didn't expect a ghost to appear, but I needed the world to see that I was finally keeping the truce. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders that I hadn't even realized I was carrying. It wasn't that the guilt was gone. It would never be gone, but the betrayal was over. I had returned the signal to the place it belonged. I left the mirror there, tucked into a knot in the oak tree. I figured it had spent enough time in my pocket. It needed to be back in the wind and the sun. I walked away from those trees, and I didn't look back. I felt like I was finally, truly going home. When I got back to the States, Martha was waiting for me at the airport. I hugged her, and for the first time in 50 years, I cried. I cried for the sniper. I cried for the boy in the woods, and I cried for the 20-year-old version of myself who had been too afraid to be a man of his word. I told her everything. We sat in the car in the parking lot for 2 hours while I poured it all out. She didn't turn away. She didn't look at me like I was a monster. She just held my hand and listened. When I was finished, she said, "Henry, we all have shadows. It's what we do in the light that matters." Now I'm 92. Martha has been gone for 5 years, and the house is quiet. My children are grown, and they have children of their own. They come over and they ask me about the war, and I tell them the stories they want to hear, the hero stories. But I also tell them about the signals. I tell them about the importance of the things we don't say and the promises we make when no one is watching. I tell them that the world is a dark place, but we all carry a little piece of glass that can reflect the light if we're brave enough to hold it up. I'm telling you this story because I don't want the signal to die with me. I want you to understand that the enemy is just a word we use when we're too tired to look for the person. I want you to remember that a split-second decision can last a lifetime, and that mercy is the only thing that can truly end a war. I'm an old soldier, and I've seen enough killing to last 1,000 years. But the thing I remember most isn't the sound of the guns. It's the silence of that afternoon on the ridge and the glint of a mirror that was asking for a piece I wasn't ready to give. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten.